Welcome to Autism Knows No Borders, a podcast where people connected to autism inspire change and build community. Together with the Global Autism Project, I'm your host, Rachel Harmon, a professional with over a decade of experience in the field of autism services, outreach, and advocacy. How can we stay in the present moment and open our mind to difficult thoughts and feelings? If you want to know how to enhance your emotional and cognitive flexibility, stay with us for this episode with Dr. Stephen C. Hayes. Stephen Hayes is a clinical psychologist, a researcher, the originator of acceptance and commitment therapy and relational frame theory, and a co-developer of process-based therapy. He has spent the past 4 decades studying how to ease human suffering and is one of the most cited psychologists in the world, having published 47 books and nearly 700 scientific articles. This episode is part 2 of my conversation with Stephen Hayes. We discuss how acceptance and commitment therapy can help autistic people, where the concept of normal came from and how it's been harmful to the autistic community, why Stephen thinks behavior analysts should care about ACT, how ACT can help families, and tips for clinicians seeking to integrate ACT into their practice. In this episode, discover what's possible when you flex your mind. And now, I present you Dr. Stephen Hayes. Let's talk more specifically about how ACT can help autistic people who have these language skills. And, we hear a lot from the community about experiencing heightened sensory sensitivities or anxiety, even masking, for example. So how can ACT help with these kinds of challenges?
Well, that's a work in progress, but one of the things where we need to start, seems to me, if we're never going to get there and everybody's on the journey, then instead of thinking in normative categorical terms, we need to think in personal terms, and we need to honor people's journey and support them in their journey and allow them to have a say about what their journey is about. The deep message of people being neurodivergent, when we dig into it, and I can tell you about where the ACT work is going, especially in process-based therapy and its research on idionomics. We've been sold a bill of goods of comparing ourselves to normal and being called out that we somehow have to fit into that. Everybody. And it's behavioral science that did this over a long period of time. And while it has some benefits for the world, it's been hugely horrible for the world as well. And it needs to end. The hugely horrible is that a lot of the concepts that we use, the methods, the measures, the statistics, etc., were all based on figuring out who's normal and who isn't, and idealizing certain tips of a distribution as if that predicts your future. It starts with Galton, who goes from, they had bell curves and they had norms, but the word normal wasn't hardly even in the English language. It was almost never used. It was used only in geometry, and that's in the 1830s, 1840s, not by normal people. There it is. I just said it. You can hardly have a conversation with anybody without slipping into norms and all the kitchen table conversations. Well, it turns out that what Galton did was to say, to invent the standard deviation and basically say the people who are the most important are the ones that are up on the distribution of a given moment in time of a bell curve. For a dirty purpose, you probably know the purpose was eugenics. He created the field. And his very, very first book, he's the grandson of Erasmus Darwin, as was Charles Darwin, his cousin. And he kind of envied Charles Darwin. And his very first book was called The Hereditary Genius, where he argued basically that upper-class white UK people should have children and everybody else shouldn't. And you know where that went, the middle part of the last century. But it went there because of the behavioral scientists, especially in America. The Europeans held it off, interestingly, because of the analytic tradition. And we embraced it. And behavior analysts, very interesting story. They are both the heroes looking back and the devils looking back. John B. Watson was on the American Eugenics Society Committee on the Genetic Basis of Intelligence. There were 3 people on it. Yerkes, who was this racist, oh my God. And I'm blocking his name, but the Stanford Binet guy in Stanford. And John B. Watson, give me 4 people, I'll make them a candlestick maker or whatever. No, genetic. I choose genetic. And then you got heroes like Beth Wellman, the person who trained Jack Goritz, who trained Don Baer, who's one of the fathers of behavior analysts, who held the line and said, no, you can actually develop IQ if you treat people well, and had data showing it out of the Iowa Child Research Center. And Terman, the guy in Stanford, so hated that he got the director of that center to quit and go to DC and be part of the NIH by threatening to out him as being gay if he wouldn't retract the claim that IQ can be improved. So we're sitting here with a dirty history of shoving people into categories based on where they're on a bell curve. And the one that really lights my hair on fire, if I had hair to light, in my journey over the last 10, 12 years on process-based therapy, about 6 years ago, I came across this issue of ergodicity, where we realized that statistically it's impossible to go from a bell curve to predicting people's future. Everybody thinks you can do it, and it's false. It's a lie. It's statistically impossible. We can dig into that if you want. But here's where we are right now, and I'll try to land the plane. Instead of comparing ourselves to others in this little mental bell curve where even 7-year-olds know their percentile rank in school and stupid things like that, thinking that's their future, which is a lie. Not only that, it's a dirty lie for racist, anti-Semitic reasons. We need to be thinking about our particular journeys and where we would like to take it, given everything that is so for us. And if you ask the question of, well, then what? I'd say, well, what do you aspire to? And let's see. And that is not a form of ableism. We're not saying, oh, you can do everything or whatever. No, it's a matter of, let's see. Let's see. And there's so many human lives who've been pushed into, like, okay, so go back to your question. Why the masking, let's say? Well, it's in part to be accepted in a group that has been socialized into an idea that the ideal is to be normal, or if you're going to be abnormal, which turns out almost everybody is, be extraordinary in some way that's set up by the idealized normal. Really? Who came up with that idea? The person who created eugenics. And so I mention eugenics in part not to shame people who are using normal stats and so forth, but just to say, when you're using those tools of diagnosis and all that kind of stuff and categorizing people, slow down and look more carefully at what we really want from behavioral science, which is we want a hand up, a leg up, and let's get in a more humble place where the journeys are honored. And let's see. That might then help create a culture in which, and I think that's happening inside the neurodiversity work, in which we don't have to, for example, if somebody's self-stimming or something, you have to stop it. You have to stop it. Why? Because I don't like it. Dude, you may not like a lot of things about somebody. It gives you the right to say, because I don't like it, means that this would be of importance. And behavior analysts said, boy, made that mistake historically. There are the heroes of the world out there who fought the good fight. Don Bear I mentioned already. But then there's others, the be still, be quiet, be docile, an article I wish everybody would read. It's old, but that, this idea of, I'll give you an example, you shouldn't be wandering around in the classroom, ADHD kids, etc. I mean, my son carried that diagnosis. And yeah, the teacher thought that he was sort of not showing respect. He was in his own world out there, and he's bright as shit. So it's going to be a journey together, and here's my answer to it, or not a full answer, but a way forward. I think if we can push the reset button and begin to be focused on how to empower people rather than categorize people, and where we do that with humility and participation and listening, we have a lot to learn. And we have a better chance to do that, given the sensitivities that are there right now, if it's turned and interesting in a way, with people pushing back against being shoved into a normal frame. And that's there in the neurodiversity space, but it's also there in diversity, equity, inclusion kind of spaces more generally. It can turn into a kind of wokeism. It can, and I can unpack what I mean by that. But it doesn't need to, and it has the chance to completely change the culture in a way that where every voice matters and the journey is honored.
Hey, Rachel here. Do you know anyone else who might benefit from listening to this episode? Maybe an autistic person wanting to grow their community, a parent wanting to support their loved one, or a professional wanting to develop their skills. I encourage you to share this episode if you'd like to help them out. And now, back to the conversation. Taking it back to the autistic individual's perspective, who maybe isn't formally trained in ACT, how can they take some of these processes and apply it to their everyday life? Like, for example, maybe there's an adult out there who is bullied at work, and one of their values is to be as authentic as they can be. What are some things that they can do? What are some exercises they can practice?
Well, immediately I start thinking of, when people are bullied, let's say there's different features of it. Sometimes people are really crossing a line. They're doing things that are even illegal or not to be supported. Often it's more subtle than that, and it's social. Well, can we help people with the supports they need to feel supported and included in environments in ways that fit with who they are? I consulted at a large laboratory of people who work in national security. I won't name the particular place, but it was very important to our national security. And quite a number of people there are on the spectrum, and they bring some serious skills of being able to sit in front of that monitor and do this kind of task and do it with great attention and so forth. But then also feel, when they walk out to the lunchroom, excluded and pushed to the side or ignored. Can we help create a sense of community and connection? And I think that's what's often happened in the neurodiversity community, is that we have built a place where people can be themselves in virtually and sometimes physically. So take that as an example. Even the very idea of doing that might mean opening the door. Does anybody else feel this way? That may be a hard conversation to have. And the opportunities to engage in it may be very limited, and they may require some skills and things. Can we help people self-advocate for what they really need? And let me just say this, the self-advocacy, my last PhD just landed. I did 57 my whole career. My last one was, it was filed, I think, a month ago, Stu Law. He was in the behavior analysis program here at UNR. I was both in behavior analysis and in clinical. And he's doing work on relational abilities and verbal abilities that undergird self-advocacy. And so he's interested in things like, how can we create a world in which people have the dignity of risk, and you can make choices that, the in loco parentis way of thinking about persons wouldn't necessarily lead to. If somebody wants to do a bar crawl, nobody should be saying to an adult who can make choices like that, no, you can't, or have children, or marry, and people have taken it on themselves, professionals and systems have taken it upon themselves that it's okay to take away freedoms like that, and it's not. However, here's the part that, as behavior analysts, where it needs to land. Are the skills there, and I'll use the word skills, for self-advocacy? Now come back to ACT and give an example. There may be some emotional openness skills that are required to take even small steps in a given context that would move towards something that could be possible, such as, let's say there is a group of people who are neurodiverse who meet, let's say, on Saturdays there in that community. It might mean going to the group. That may be a huge, huge, huge step. And wouldn't it be cool to have people supporting that and making that so that you don't have to infantilize or categorize or do a wagging finger. You don't have to go to the group. This is your choice. And life might be asking you a question here, because the support you may found there might be really important as to how then I'm going to deal with being bullied. There may be other people in the same worksite who, with you together, can do some things where joint action could succeed that individual action would seem impossible, just as an example. So here's the way to think about it. Psychological flexibility is, what we mean by flexible is we mean having repertoires that are able, in context, to be able to move towards what you really want, given where you are, one step at a time. And where you want, meaning on a values-based journey, this has qualities that I want to manifest and put in my life. And then let's see. We don't know how far, fast, etc. That's not the issue. We're always able to compare ourselves to others, of course. What's more important is, are we on a growth journey that we control and decide as adults? I'm not giving you a concrete technique, but I might just add a few. Let's just say there are programs you could do even before going to that group. And nowadays, we've got things, that'll easily tag in on a phone or a computer screen or things like that will work on your emotional flexibility and cognitive flexibility skills. And some of them are not complicated. I'll give you an example. It'll sound silly, but then I'll link it over. Let's say you have a thought that stops you. There's something there for you that you kind of want to do, but you have a thought that stops you. What would happen if you take that thought and said it several times in a silly voice? Let's say the thought is, I can't do it. And you decide okay, I'm going to do that. And you say it several times in the voice of Donald Duck. I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. The next time you have that thought, I can't do it, it'll have a slightly different feel to it, and not one that's quite as harsh. How do I know that's that helpful? Well, Heidi Ehlers and I were working with children who, when things were disrupted, threw major tantrums. And a particular child I'm thinking of liked to play with trains, but if the little wooden tracks ever broke, that's a half an hour tantrum, minimum. made it awfully darn difficult to be in schools and things like that because there were tasks that she liked. Okay, so exposure with response prevention, actually take the place where what you wanted didn't happen. What are you going to do? Well, but we did that by playing a game of silly voices before we went in and would play, and then the train track would break. And what would we do? We would say in silly voices things like, I'm not as good at Donald Duck saying train track broke, but we would, and the child could pick the silly voice, Mickey Mouse or whatever. If you're doing it and you're listening to this, you could pick your least favorite politician or, a cartoon character you like or anybody. That's just one tiny example. There's hundreds of techniques like this. Taking a difficult thought, distill it to a different word and repeat it. Take a difficult thought and sing it aloud to the tune of Happy Birthday. Mm-hmm. The repeated one, 30 seconds of repetition at least once per second. The distress and believability goes down by like half, 30 seconds. So we don't have to live inside the cages that our minds create for us. We can respectfully decline the invitation and we can open the door of that cage and walk through those doors with tiny little supports. And the ACT community has come up with hundreds of these methods. This is called diffusion. It's a made-up word, a neologism. Fusion meaning the content of the words and its meaning and behavioral regulatory impact, its function as a rule, is so tight. It's as if it's fused or poured together like lemonade. But if we do funny things, we kind of break them apart. And you can have a thought like, I can't do it, without the same emotional impact by changing the context. And because of that, maybe you can have that thought and still engage in behaviors that don't completely comport with the thought. It doesn't dominate other sources of behavioral regulation. What are the other sources? What you want, what you value, what you care about. And so it can be quite playful, but it's not because you're ridiculing your mind. I like doing some ones that are very compassionate. And the way I usually do it is have a person think of things they used to think as young children, that where they have grown and are more flexible, and go back to that time and then take some of the thoughts that they're having now that stop them. Imagine that child, maybe even get a picture of that child that you once were. Say those words that you say to yourself now that stop you. And what would you do? And almost always people would tell the younger version, it's okay. It's going to get better. They may want to hug that younger child. Well, that's an example. It's a diffusion method. So it's not making fun of our minds. We're not ridiculous. We're human. Mm-hmm. So I'm only working on the cognitive diffusion skills, but there's 6 in the psychological part plus your body and relationships. And each one of them has multiple features, but also has hundreds of methods, hundreds. And once you see it, you can make them up. People in Get Out of Your Mind, Into Your Life, the first self-help book on ACT that was written 20 years ago, became a bestseller, beat Harry Potter for one glorious week. It was written up in a 5-page story of Time magazine. But in there, we train people to come up with their own ideas, their own methods. And so people send me things, and they will do things like print a T-shirt, and it walks around with things like, I'm neurodiverse, sue me. It's just people breaking out.
Yeah.
Where it was like, something to be held back or maybe even feel ashamed about. Now it's something to put forward and maybe be proud about. Just as an example.
Yeah. That's really helpful.
And let's together in community come up with them. Frankly, because I get these things, I know individuals can be more creative than the people who work with them. how much more would that be true for entire communities of people who are part of that? A lot of the ACT people have trauma histories. That's not by accident. A lot of them struggle with anxiety and depression. That's not by accident, or addiction problems. And I think we're seeing the same thing in the neurodiversity community, is that we have a lot of people gravitating towards ACT and coming up with new ways out of their own experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one draw is definitely the compassionate side. For clinicians working with autistic clients, what's a good first step of integrating ACT into their practice?
Well, I think it varies from country to country. The BCBAs in the US of A are different around the world. I mean, in Brazil, for example, behavior analysts can function like clinical psychologists because of the history with Fred Keller and others in the early days of Brazil and so on. Here, most states have lots of restrictions around psychotherapy with BCBAs. So let's start with scope of practice. If you're a professional, you function within your scope of practice. And we've mentioned things like parent training that are clearly within our scope of practice. Anybody who wants to say we can't use ACT in parent training as a behavior analyst, I'm wondering, what the heck are we talking about? Now, you're going to have to learn, if you're working, for example, with neurodiverse populations, how to even talk about this in a more behavioral way that will be able to be paid for and recognized as legitimate. But, on the task list for BCBAs, equivalence-based training is there. Relational frame theory starts out of, I think it's still the best theory of how equivalence happens. I think it's more data than any other. In there, derived relational responding is now listed, at least something you should study and maybe not master. You see it in the white book. You see some of these ideas. It's taken a long time to get there. 30 years is too much, but okay, it's there. And there's even mentions of ACT and so forth. So if we can get beyond that, we're talking about how to, in a behaviorally sensible way, put some of these techniques and methods and processes into your routine work with parents, families, and with recipients of care working on their own psychological flexibility. Now you've got a scope of competence issue. Just because you're a behavior analyst doesn't mean that you know and you pass the BCBA kind of things. Doesn't mean you know all the things that are there to be known. And so you're going to need training, and you're going to need books. There's a book right over there from Association of Behavior Analysis International, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy for Behavior Analysts. People want to tell me that ACT doesn't belong in behavior analysis. Well, the International Society of Behavior Analysts disagrees enough that that's their book that they recruited. It's me, Mark Dixon, Jordan Bilal, and I think it's a pretty good book, but there's now quite a number of them, including specifically focused on neurodivergent populations. That's in this. And you probably know some of the work that Mark has done with PEAK and AIM, which is his use of RFT, and school-based, especially ACT. There's another one, working in schools. We can't do that. Hello. Bringing it into a school setting. And then I think we should look at the literature. I mentioned that study with Heidi Ehlers. There's scores of studies now on how to bring ACT techniques, and often with single case designs and sometimes getting to randomized trials. We're willing to play both. When you're in China, you speak Chinese, and the coin of the realm includes randomized trials in lots of care areas, and I worry about too much narrowness of only single case designs. What we should do instead is add high density longitudinal process and outcome information to our RCTs and build it on a foundation of single case designs. That's what I think should happen. But anyway, there's entire courses. Sorry for the commercial, but if you go to act.courses, I have a course with Mark Dixon and Ruth Ann Rayfeld, recent president of ABAI. It's called ACT Foundations for Behavior Analysts. And we walk through element by element by element. I think it's about a 20-hour training program, reasonably priced, that models the skills, shows the skills, has actual clients, so you can see sessions, and then come to some of the places where this work is being done. The Association for Contextual Behavioral Science is another face of behavior analysis. And, I did create it in part because I didn't think ABAI, which was my home base for all those years. I went from MABA, even before there was an ABAI, that's how long ago. I didn't think, given how it was being received, that I would live to see ACT and RFT enter into behavior analysis if I stayed only with ABAI. And ACBS started. It's now bigger than ABAI. There's 9,000 members all around the world. They're of all different kinds. But there's a special interest group on behavior analysis, and about a tenth of the members, that's almost 1,000, are card-carrying behavior analysts and BCBAs, including recognized trainers in ACT. And ABAI has a number of ACT things going on there too, and RFT stuff too. But I think consider the possibility of becoming a member of ACBS, taking online courses, reading books, I do another thing called ACT Boot Camp for behavior analysts. I did one in Oakland here just a few months ago. DJ Moran, myself, Brianna Cower, who's a BCBA practitioner and a really, really good one, and Siri Ming, who's an expert in RFT. So, that's just mine. If you look around, you'll see other people are out there doing stuff. So you can get the training. It's not going to cost you an arm and a leg. You can take it back to your practice. You can learn how to write the things in such a way that you'll be paid for it. And then let's see. Let's see what happens. And I get emails almost every day saying, this has made a huge difference in my practice, a huge difference in my personal life. And I see it in the lives of the parents I work with and the children I work with and the schools I work with. We don't have to check our data, our principles, our philosophy at the door. We can be full behavior analysts and really have some important things to say about sadness, about thoughts that tell you that you're not good enough, that people don't want to be with you, or feeling as though you have to step back for fear of the social rejection you'll face if you step forward. Why wouldn't we? Mm-hmm. One step at a time, empirical, thoughtful. It's not, I believe, I don't see that. So it's frustrating that it's been so long, such a hard journey. The first articles on ACT, the very first one was 1984 in the Journal of Behaviorism. So we're now at 41 years later. And I am living to see it. ABAI had a special day in San Diego. It was all ACT and RFT. And here's a book over my shoulder published by ABAI, and ACBS isn't happy. But I also see many, many, many people who just don't want to consider relational frame theory and ACT as something that could be behavioral, and they just literally won't read the research and won't try the methods. Hopefully the people listening right now are not in that group. One little step at a time. Just see. Check it out.
Yeah. Well, I think the future is bright, Stephen.
I do too. And I'm especially buoyed up by the fact that we have really good ACT trainers and stuff who are neurodiverse themselves, who are part of the community, and who are bringing it. And they're not, I believe, people either. They're just taking what's there and trying to move the ball down the road even more. And that's all I can ask for. So one reason I said yes to this podcast is not because I have the answers. You heard a few answers from me. No, it's just that I know that down this road there are answers, and we have some answers, and we have a pretty good indication, just in the research that's been done, of great potential ahead of us. And we're entering into the mainstream in different ways. That study I mentioned, one of the biggest impact behavior analytics study ever done in the history of our field, I think it's big number 3 in terms of citation impact, was funded by a huge grant. Mark Dixon right now has a huge grant with the entire state of Hawaii. He has school systems in Illinois for the entire school district, including, by the way, not just the ED and on the spectrum classroom. No, the entire school. They were so impressed with what happened, they put it into curriculum for the entire school of elementary school kids, and why wouldn't you? So we're on the side of something that could help our field, but immediately can help the lives of the people we serve.
Yeah, so important. Amazing. Well, Stephen, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and really just sharing your work with us. I hope that people listening, behavior analysts, will see the value, and also that autistic people who are listening might even associate the good work of ACT and generalize into the greater science that will shift perspectives about behavioral science in general.
That's my hope as well.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's a good way to end. And thank you so much for the opportunity to lift up your listeners and community in any way that I can. I've mentioned some ways, but let me just say that if people want to follow or communicate, if they go to stephencace.com, you can be on a monthly newsletter, and it's one click to opt out, and we'll keep you informed of all these kinds of things that are happening.
Okay. Thanks for tuning in to Autism Knows No Borders. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with one person who you think will find value in it too. By doing so, you'll be helping our mission to improve access to autism services around the world. Thanks for listening. Take care.